Greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. And we're very glad that you could join us for another in our continuing series of virtual Voices of the Game programs. My name, Bruce Markison. I work in the education department, but a lot more important is who our guest is. And he is really our first full-fledged returning guest. We like him so much. We're bringing him back for a second time. His name is Jayson Stark, winner of the BBWAA Career Excellence Award back in 2019. Currently writes for the Athletic website, has written a number of books. Jayson, it's great to see you again. Hard to believe that it's been almost a year since we last talked.
It really is, Bruce, and I'm really the first two-time virtual voice of the game. What an honor!
That's right, and you will be getting
cool.
You're going to get a prize in the mail. I have to get your address, and you'll be getting a very nice prize, possibly multiple prizes. So we'll be sending those out to you. For those not familiar with Jayson, and I'm sure most baseball fans are, but he's a longtime baseball writer. Grew up in the Philadelphia area. Graduated not too far from here. Graduated Syracuse University here in Central New York. As I mentioned, won the newly named award, the BBWAA Career Excellence Award. He has written a number of books, writes for The Athletic. We're going to talk to Jayson about a number of topics over the next 45 minutes or so. We also want to mention some of the books that Jayson has written. I was about to say books that Jayson has read. I know he's read more than these three books, and he's actually written more than three books, but these are three of the highlighted ones: The Stark Truth, Worth the Wait, also Wild Pitches. Jayson did a book signing a number of years ago for his Wild Pitches book. Jayson, we want to talk to you about spring training this year. You are actually covering spring training from home. Why is that? How are you able to do it? It seems like a daunting challenge to me.
Hey, yeah, Bruce, normally I would not be sitting in this chair. I'd be sitting in a ballpark somewhere. It's March. I'd no doubt be in Florida. Been to Florida many Marches in a row. The last few years, I've gone to Arizona in February and Florida in March, and then this year it's none of the above because of the pandemic. And it's a strange thing, you know. Those of us who work in baseball, we have a rhythm to our lives. And part of that rhythm is, if you live in the East, if you live in the Northeast, you got to freeze your butt off through the Super Bowl. But once you get through that, you know, there are palm trees waiting for you. It's very comforting, but not this year. And, you know, it's not just the fact that there's a pandemic. It's the fact that because of the pandemic, there are a number of protocols in place that the league has, the teams have, and there's very little access. There's nothing that compares with the access that we would normally have in a normal spring training. And so, you know, there are some members of the media who have gone to spring training, but it's just not the same. So, I mean, seriously, I've done the entire spring so far via Zoom, via phone call, via text and email. It's different. I'll say that, but yeah. This is where we are. It's 2021, man.
I imagine you've got quite a Rolodex, if we can use such an outdated term, of players and managers, front office executives, people who are on the ground in Florida and Arizona, and you probably do your best to tap into those resources, those sources, to find out what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I'm actually the point person for the National Baseball Writers with Major League Baseball to try to carve out ways that we can all cover spring training, whether we're there or not. And so that involves a lot of Zooming with a lot of different teams, daily Zooms that we all have access to if we need to. And I've hopped on several of those Zooms, but what I really try to do, because of the nature of my job, is I'm not looking for the same stuff that local media is looking for. I'm not looking for the same quotes that everybody else has. And so I've done a lot of different things where this was just the other day, Madison Bumgarner was pitching he was going to do a Zoom with the Arizona media after he finished pitching. For a story I'm writing for tomorrow, I wanted to talk to him about his hitting. And so I asked if when he was finished with his Zoom with everybody else, he could hang on there and talk to me one-on-one. He said, yeah, I do that. The Diamondback said, we can make that happen. And that is the way I've done a lot of this. But just beyond that, I've got to check in with scouts, front office people, actual humans who have seen stuff in person and can tell me what they've seen. That's the part of spring training that I miss the most, not counting the part where the sun drops into the Gulf of Mexico every night.
Yeah, that is nice. What about during the regular season? Any idea on how things are going to change? You're going to have more access? Will you be able to go to selected parks?
We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I think initially it's going to be a lot of what we dealt with last year, which again is a lot of Zoom. Certainly no clubhouse access. Initially, no field access. Again, I've worked with Major League Baseball on these issues. Still waiting for them to decide how they're going to go about it. It's not all within their control, but I would say everybody's hopeful that at some point, some semblance of normalcy will return where at least we can go to the field before the game and maybe talk to somebody social distanced. There's been a little of that that's going on in spring training, very little. But hopefully that's where we're headed. And look, if all goes really well, we'll be back in locker rooms, if not September, October, then 2022. But all of this, Bruce, is a work in progress. And look, there are a lot of people in my business who are very frustrated by having to do their jobs this way. But what do we say in March, man? Survive and advance. That's what we got to do. Let's get through today and then see what tomorrow brings.
Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but it's certainly better than where we were a year ago when we didn't know if a season would take place.
Yep.
Then we learned it would be a 60-game season. There was no media access at the ballpark, no fans until the postseason. So it's getting better. It's not exactly where we wanted to be, but at least headed in the right direction.
Yeah, Bruce, let me just say, it's exactly 1 year since I walked in the door of my house, since leaving last year's spring training early. It's 1 year ago today.
Wow.
It is really surreal to think about that year, but obviously not just for me.
Hard to believe. Jayson, let's talk about spring training in 2021. And there are some things definitely different about this year's spring training. In the earlier part of the spring, we had this new rule that was put into place. Teams had an option to play 5-inning, 7-inning, or the regular 9-inning games. Your thoughts on this change, how that went over?
I understand it. This is about health and safety. Teams don't have 27 pitchers hanging around spring training. They can't call up pitchers from their minor league camp just to get through a day of spring training. There is no minor league camp. And so, this was the stuff that they had to do to protect the health and safety, particularly of pitchers, in a year where there are going to be incredible demands on guys who didn't pitch a whole lot last year. So the reasoning for it, I understand, but it's produced some really strange stuff. I had somebody tweeted me the other day, is it possible to have a walk-off homer in the second inning? Because, the pitcher reached his pitch count, he gave up a home run, and then everybody walked off the field and they called the end of the inning. It's just what they had to do because they didn't want the guy to be out there to throw 50 pitches in one inning. But you see some sights, man. It's just part of it.
You referenced this mercy rule, as some have called it. Managers have the option to end an inning if one of their pitchers throws 30 pitches in an inning. So they could cut it off at that point, but then the pitcher could actually come back,
right,
and pitch the next inning.
It's a strange sight. It's a strange spring. It's the strangest spring ever. This just fits right into it. Like, once again, the reasons for it make a lot of sense. I know there've been some fans who have been frustrated paying to go to these spring training games, even with reduced admission, and they go to a game and the game lasts 5 innings, or they go to see somebody pitch, and halfway through the third inning he walks off the mound, and that's that. Um, this is just part of the landscape of spring training 2021. The good news is we're back to normal now. All the games are 9 innings as of this week.
Yeah. You mentioned something a moment ago, and let's clarify this because I wasn't sure about ticket prices for spring training this year. You mentioned that some of the prices are reduced. Is that how it's working?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, they're not reduced.
The prices are the same, and it's caused some frustration. But you're paying this spring just for a taste of baseball. Yeah. You're not paying for what we've all gotten used to in the past. There's hopefully a certain joy to just being in a ballpark again. We went through an entire baseball season when no one experienced that. And so to at least walk through the gates of a ballpark in this spring means something. It just doesn't mean what it's always meant in the past.
We're seeing small percentages of fans being allowed in the spring training parks, at least most of them in Florida and Arizona. I know watching exhibition games from home, it's nice to see at least a few fans in the ballpark. It's nice to hear that more natural crowd noise, even if it's a little bit subdued.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And as I said, I've gone on a lot of these Zooms, and everybody talks about it. Everybody comments about it. We all did the best we could last year to get through the season with fake crowd noise, and some of these teams did an amazing job. But there's nothing like real people. Okay, I'm a fan of real people, and I think we all share that. And it's just great for players to look into the eyes of the people who are sitting in those seats and remember that what they do for a living means something to those people. They get to hear real cheers. They get to hear real messages of hope and faith, and people who love their team and love the players on that team. And those aren't the only sounds, but the sounds of baseball were in many ways the biggest thing that we missed from last year. It may have looked kind of the same, but it never sounded the same. And Bruce, I wrote about this at one point last year. Go back and watch. Pick out your favorite moment in baseball. Go to YouTube, find it, watch it, and you know what you'll see? You'll see that moment that's stuck in your brain. But what really stood out to me last year was what it sounded like. And we missed that. You can't simulate that. And so looks like now every team is going to have at least some fans in the seats opening day. And gradually there are going to be more and more of them if all goes well. It's a really important part of baseball. Can't wait.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing. And I'm going to be honest, I've learned something. I used to think that major league players didn't really care that much about fan reaction, and they tuned all that out. And this has kind of taught me that's just not the case. So many players last year talked about the difficulty of getting motivated, in a sense, to play in front of an empty ballpark, to not have fans there. And they've continued to talk about that this year and how it's different with fans there. Players really do care. They do want the fans there. It means something. Now, nobody likes to be booed, but certainly you like to hear some kind of reaction. It makes a difference.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And this was a constant topic of conversation last year, is that the teams that were able to bring their own energy, manufacture their own energy, despite the absence of those people, were the teams that had the best experience, and often were the teams that made it into the postseason. Um, Look, we take for granted those sounds, those people, and what that energy that they bring means. And you don't know what you've got till it's gone. You know that expression? I think that was never more true than last year. Um, for these players to bring their own energy to the park every day was really difficult, was really challenging. It was harder than it looked. Not everybody could do it, especially under the conditions they had to live with all day long when they were not at the park. And so to bring back those people, to bring back that energy, to bring back that semblance of normalcy is going to be a really important ingredient in this year.
Jayson, let's talk about what we can look forward to in the regular season, which is just a couple of weeks away. It'll start on April 1st, which I believe is a Thursday.
Yep.
Some of the rules that were put into place last year are going to still be a part of baseball in 2021. Let me get your thoughts on each of these. First up, teams are going to have rosters of 26 players instead of 25, the traditional pre-2020 rule. Your thoughts on that? Should it be more than 26? Is 26 the right number? Should we be limiting the number of pitchers on the roster? What do you think about the roster size?
Well, Bruce, last year it was 28, and there definitely is some grumbling out there from front offices, managers, pitching coaches about not having 28 again this year. Right. I touched on this earlier, but last year, because the season was only 60 games, nobody got in the amount of innings that they're used to. And so think about the number of innings that have to be covered this season in a 162 game season. Last year, a team only had to find bodies who could pitch a little more than 500 innings. This year, it's more than 1,400 innings. And where are those innings coming from? You can't push pitchers the way you have in the past. And so if you're only going to have a limited number of pitchers on the roster and only 26 players on the roster, it means we're back to where we were a couple of years ago. This is something that baseball hoped to get away from, and that is that constant shuttle of pitchers who go down and come up and go down and come up. There is going to be a taxi squad, as there was last year, of 3 players who will travel with the team. There'll be 1 extra catcher. The other 2 will almost certainly be pitchers for the most part, so that you don't have to fly somebody in when you need that extra arm. Yeah. But only having 26 players in a year like this, it's going to really tax teams' depth and their ability to keep their pitchers healthy.
I think it's a good point. Let's go back in history a little bit. If you go back to baseball in the 50s and 60s, teams used to start the season with 28-man rosters. And I think it was maybe the first month of the year, you could have the extra players. And then at some point, I believe it was in May, maybe middle of May, you then had to reduce down to 25, the more traditional roster limit that we've seen in place from the 70s on. Maybe something like that is the way to go. Maybe you start with 28 and then you work down to 26. But I agree. I think 28 is a pretty reasonable number to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, this would have been a year to do something like that, especially early on. There's not, if you look at spring training, there's no split squad games. There's a limited number of B games. Finding innings for pitchers to build up in spring training is hard. There's no minor league camp to send them to. And so when these teams come north in April or wherever they go, I think it's going to be a big challenge to have enough arms to get through the month and to find arms if you need more, if your pitchers aren't ready or they're not healthy. This is something to watch. It really is.
Let's go to point number 2. Doubleheaders like last year will be comprised of 2 7-inning games. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Where do you stand on this one?
I'm not a big fan of this in general. I get it. I understand why all these rules are in place. 7-inning games are there because it's one thing that baseball doesn't want during a pandemic is to have players hanging around the park with each other for hours and hours and hours. It's a health and safety concern. And so they're looking for ways to avoid that. So that's one reason to do these 7-inning doubleheaders. The other is just the challenge in trying to reschedule games if you have an outbreak on a team. Now, it's gone incredibly well this spring. We've had a total, if I'm right, of 21 players test positive across 30 teams going back to intake testing, which began a month ago this week. And so that's incredible. But there's still a lot of concern because players are not in that age group where they're likely to have been vaccinated yet, that there can still be outbreaks when the season starts. And then making up games is going to be much harder this year than last year. Last year, teams were playing the same teams over and over and over again with those regional schedules. This year, everybody's got to play in 4 time zones. So it's going to be hard. If the Mets go to the West Coast and have an entire road trip wiped out because of a COVID outbreak, where they lose 6-7 games in San Diego and Los Angeles, think about the challenge of trying to make up those games. So 7-inning doubleheaders make it easier to make up games. So that's the other part of that.
Yeah. What about the extra innings beginning with a runner on second? It certainly achieved its goal last year. Games ended much more quickly. We didn't have 16, 18, 19 inning games. Games tended to end in the 10th or 11th inning. So it did work out that well. But some people look at this, it's so artificial, it's so contrived. I've heard some people, including myself, suggest maybe we put the runner at first base instead of second base. Your thought on this rule?
I thought I'd hate this rule. I can't really like this rule. It's nonstop strategy. It's nonstop second guessing. It's nonstop action. I remember talking to Morgan Ensberg, who was a AA manager in the Rays system before this started last year, and he said, "This is tremendous." He said, "It's half-court baseball, and it's awesome." And what he meant was, if you thought this was just going to be bunt them over, get them in, that's not how teams handle it. There was very little of that. Now, if the home team got through the top of the 10th and there was a tie game, they were more likely to bunt, depending on where they were in the lineup. But in general, we saw some fun stuff, some crazy stuff. And I, as you know, I'm a fan of strangeness in baseball. I'm a fan of that thing we saw that we never saw before. Because of this rule, we had so much of that. I'll give you an example. There was a Mets-Yankees game that it started with line drive double play, strikeout in the top of the inning with the Yankees up. So what was that, Bruce? That was the old 2 up, 3 down inning. Never had any of those before in history. And then in the bottom of the 10th, up step Pete Alonso and hit a walk-off, lead-off home run. Never had any of those before. And so it was a walk-off, lead-off, 2-run homer. But the big thing was this: how many batters batted in the top and the bottom of the inning combined? 3. The first 1, 2, 3 inning in baseball history where both teams batted. So this is the kind of stuff that went with it. I thought it was fun. Let me make one more point. Somebody observed this to me last year when we were having this debate. You can make a case that baseball has the least interesting overtime in any of the sports, or it did before this rule. If I remember right, a run was scored in only 25% of all half innings and extra innings before we went to this rule. And then it zoomed up to, if I remember right, 57%. So extra innings overtime became way more entertaining. And all right, it's not quite normal baseball, but I just remind you, they decide the World Cup on penalty kicks. Okay. This resembles real baseball a lot more than penalty kicks resemble the rest of the World Cup, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. You'd be okay with this if they made this a permanent rule beyond 2021?
I like it. If they decided to do it in, say, the 11th inning instead of the 10th, that'd be fine with me too. But I
Yeah.
think it does make sense. There's also health and safety reasons for it, but again, I think it's interesting. There's just so much strategy that comes with it. Why not?
Yeah.
I like second guessing and first guessing.
The problem with traditional extra innings is it seems like so many hitters try to hit the home run
Yes.
and they end up striking out, and we see lots of shutout innings. And as you say, it's not necessarily that entertaining to watch shutout inning after shutout inning.
Yeah. And that wasn't a problem. We
Yeah.
didn't, I think we had 2 games in the entire season that went beyond 12 innings, and none of them went beyond 13.
Yeah. Well, the rule produced the desired effect. Let's talk about some of the minor league rules in 2021. And this just came down really over the weekend. One of the more interesting ones, a 15-second pitch clock will be used in the lower minors. Now, we've seen some variations of pitch clocks. I went to a Binghamton minor league game a few years ago, and I think they had a 20-second pitch clock that was being used. But this will be 15-second in some of the lower minor leagues. You like it or not?
I'm a fan of pitch clocks. I actually think, I know baseball's the game without a clock, but I've thought a lot about this. And here's my observation about fans. You know what fans love about a clock? They know that when that clock ticks to 0, something's going to happen. And baseball, face it, Bruce, baseball needs better rhythm. It needs more stuff happening more frequently. And the clock is a way to make that happen. Now, 15 seconds is different than what we've seen. This is in what used to be the California League, now the Western League, where they're going to try this out. There's another wrinkle to it too. The batter, within 8 seconds, has to be in the box with his eyes locked on the pitcher, or they could call a strike. Strike 2, they can call you out. And so this is a vehicle to get the games moving along to see how it works. We've reached a point where I believe it's 2/3 of the players in the big leagues have played with a pitch clock in the minor leagues now. And yet there's still a lot of division among players about whether we should have a pitch clock in the majors. I think if you really do the math on a 20-second pitch clock, it would affect so few players that we would not even notice. It would just keep the game moving.
Yeah. I don't know if you're like me, but when I'm watching other sports, I should admit that I watch other sports, but I do occasionally. I watch the 24-second shot clock in the NBA. I even watch the play clock in the NFL. I think it's 40 seconds. I'm amazed how many times they snap the ball within 2 or 3 seconds of that clock running out. So it does occupy my attention. And are you like that too? Do you notice these
Oh,
clocks?
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean is if you're sitting there in the stands and that pitcher is just kicking dirt and throwing the rosin bag and messing with his cap, and like you're wondering when is he going to throw a pitch? Well, if there's a pitch clock, okay, when that clock gets to 0, he's got to do something. And I do think fans would really like it. Now, I know one of the fears that players had was that you might have some fans, I don't know, maybe be a Yankee Red Sox game where they think they were at a Duke Carolina hoop game, and it'd be 10 seconds on the clock and they'd be counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and get the pitcher all out of whack and make them balk or something. But everybody will adjust to that clock if we have it, and almost nobody will be affected. But fans like it. I don't know what we're resisting for. I really don't.
Yeah. Maybe the most radical change is what they'll be doing in AA. Infielders must have both feet either on the infield dirt or the infield grass in front of the dirt. No more setting up in the outfield. Your thoughts on that one?
This is the first anti-shift rule since in the majors or minors since shifts became a thing, which was about 5, 6 years ago. And to me, it's kind of a statement from Major League Baseball that shifting has crossed a line, and it's just too pervasive now because the number of shifts per game have doubled over the last 2 years. They've almost quadrupled over the last 5 years. And this is a shift that it really will help left-handed hitters primarily. If you talk to left-handed hitters, what's their biggest pet peeve about the shift is they'll hit a rocket over the second baseman's head and the third baseman's standing out there 75 feet in right field and gobbles it up. And even those are not hits. This is going to really help left-handed hitters. There's a ton of data that shows that left-handed hitters are the most affected hitters by shifting. And if I remember this right, over the last 10 years, the batting average of left-handed hitters has dropped by 30 points. This should really help them. What's going to be interesting is where it goes from here. Is the next thing going to be keeping 2 infielders on either side of second base? That's actually a much harder rule to enforce. So we'll see. But I think this will have an effect. I'm fascinated to see what happens.
I'm trying to remember, Jayson, with some great left-hand power hitters of the past. Players like Willie Stargell, Willie McCovey. I don't know. I don't remember how much they were being shifted against. Certainly not like today.
Oh, no.
But I'm wondering if in setting up the second baseman, would the second baseman already be on that outfield grass, knowing the power of a Stargell or a McCovey? So in a sense, it goes beyond the shift.
Right. No, that's exactly right. Beyond those balls that the third baseman catches out in right field, the second baseman is often set up 50 feet out in right field. You don't see it very often with right-handed hitters because the throw from shortstop is just so long that the shortstop's going to sit out there in left field. But with left-handed power hitters, it's gotten so hard to get a hit. Every ground ball against the shift that we see these days is an out. They know where these guys are going to hit a ground ball and somebody's going to be standing there. But if the exit velocity off the bat is 106 miles an hour, you better be in the right spot if you can't set up in the outfield, because you can't cover any ground to your left or right. So that's another way it's going to help guys.
Another interesting change, and I'd never really heard this discussed before, but I kind of like it. In AAA, the bases will be larger. 2 things. It'll be safer for people running the bases. They'll have a larger target to land on, but it'll also give a slight advantage to base stealers because now I think you're going to be 3 inches closer.
Yeah, actually, because the bag, the first, second, and third base bag will be 3 inches larger. Instead of 15 by 15, it'll be 18 by 18. Second base is actually 4.5 inches closer to first base. Wow. That's because all of first base is in fair territory, if you think about it. So you get all 3 inches on that side, and then 1.5 inches on the second base side. And, I don't know yet how much that's going to help base stealers or encourage more base stealing. But this is definitely something that they've been thinking about inside Major League Baseball as they've studied ways to make the game more interesting and entertaining. Is fans like it when guys run. More action on the bases is a good thing. And I think this will have a subtle effect on a lot of stuff. And that's important because rather than change the game or change the rules dramatically, you might be able to nudge it in the direction of more action if you just do a bunch of subtle things. And this is one of those subtle things.
I remember the days of baseball, not that I watched it because I wasn't alive, but I've seen the highlights from the 40s and 50s. It seemed like the bases were softer and you'd see more dirt kick up when there were plays, guys running, sliding into the bases. I wonder about the hardness of the base. It seems like it just doesn't give much at all. Is that something they've looked at?
It is. And, we've had some awful injuries in recent years. The Bryce Harper one in, was it 2017, really stands out, where he was headed for maybe a second MVP award and landed funny on a wet base and really hurt his knee, was never the same that year. We've seen a lot of those in recent years, and the bases would not just be larger in AA, they're going to, or AAA, they'll have a non-slip surface.
Hmm.
and they'll be made of a fabric that drains more easily when it's wet. And this would have to be approved in the big leagues as an equipment change. And there's just not enough time to do that now. But you're going to clearly see this in the big leagues, assuming that it works the way they expect it to.
Interesting. One other minor league rule change, the pickoff attempts in the lower minors. Correct me if I don't have this right, but my understanding is pitcher, each batter, if there's a runner on first, next batter up during that at bat, the pitcher will have essentially 2 free pickoff attempts. He can then make a third pickoff attempt, but if he doesn't pick off the runner on the third try, it's a balk. The runner goes to second. Do I have it right?
You do. Now that's not in all leagues. There's that rule in one set of Class A, and then in the other set, there's a rule where the pitcher has to step off before making a move to first. So you think about that Andy Pettit balk move. He lift his leg, kind of glance toward the plate, and then do that quick throw to first. Or I covered the Phillies, the Terry Mulholland, quick step off move. Like those are now balks. You can't do those. And again, it's an attempt to get more base stealing into the sport, at least more base stealing attempts. And the Atlantic League tried the step off rule where you could only throw to the base if you stepped off. They did that 2 years ago. Stolen base attempts almost doubled to almost 2 a game. Now, we haven't seen 2 stolen base attempts per game in the major leagues since the 1800s. So think of the dramatic effect that could have on the game. That's going to be studied really closely. Yeah. I don't know about the rule where you only get 2 pickoff throws. It's going to be really hard to control the running game. After you make that one throw to first, like think of the way everything changes. The base stealer is going to be thinking, well, he's not going to want to use up that second throw. How large a lead can I take?
Right.
After the second throw, the crowd knows what's coming. If the guy can run at all, it does add some suspense and some intrigue to the running game, whether the guy goes or not. So again, that's part of the thinking. But if you're going to, if you want more base stealing in the game, you've got to incentivize it, and that's why they're experimenting with these rules.
Jayson, we've got a ton of questions coming into our chat room, so let's get to those. First, we have a comment, actually from someone here at the Hall of Fame. Love that Jayson is wearing an Otesaga sweater for our Otesaga Hotel. Very nice.
That is not a coincidence.
Yes. Beautiful hotel.
Love
That's
this.
where the Hall of Famers typically would stay, and also the award winners, like the winners of the BBWAA Award. Let's see what else we have. Robert says there are a certain segment of the population that says they are or will not get COVID vaccinations. If that happens, what's your approach going to be to doing your job? Is this something that the Athletic, do they have a policy on this? We've been hearing some talk about, or are we still too early in the phase of this?
It's still too early. We've obviously discussed a lot of different aspects of how we're going to cover this season. We haven't seen the health and safety protocols that'll be in place for the media yet, Bruce. And so once we see those, I think we'll have a better idea. I'm pretty sure we're going to see a lot of what we saw last year, where the press boxes won't be filled. There'll be social distancing. Once you get to your seat, you're not allowed to roam around. Assuming those protocols are in place, I think you'll see me at some games, but I'm waiting to see, like everybody else.
Question from Jim Jakubowski. He's a White Sox fan. He says, "Hi, Bruce. I've been scoring baseball all my life. Is there a baseball standard code on how to score that runner that starts the extra innings on second base?"
Yeah, he's the ghost runner.
The ghost runner?
He's the ghost runner. The way it works is obviously the run counts the runs scored by that runner counts, the RBI counts. What the only asterisk is that the pitcher does not get an earned run. But tell it to the pitcher. There was a game last year. I don't remember anymore who the pitcher was, but this guy came in, pitched the ninth inning, and then they brought him out to start the 10th with that ghost runner on second base. So he strikes out the only batter he faces in the 10th. Then they bring in a left-hander. The reliever, if I remember right, gives up 4 consecutive hits. But who gets the loss? It's that guy who started the inning. Even though he allowed 0 base runners, the ghost runner was his responsibility.
Really?
And that's just wrong. Okay,
Yeah.
like if that was Ed who asked the question, Ed, if you have any pull
Jim.
with the official scores, reach out to them. We got to change this.
Jayson, what about the runner? I mean, we know the run counts, but does that count as a run in his statistical total?
Everything counts except there's no earned run.
No earned run. Interesting. Okay. Let's see. Here's a question we get all the time, and I guess I ask myself this as well. Why is it? It comes in from Ann. Why is it that more players don't work on hitting to the opposite field? Is it just not? Is it not encouraged by major league hitting coaches, major league organizations? Are players not willing to make the adjustment? Is it too difficult to make the adjustment at this level? Why do you think that is?
Well, that's a great question, and it's a long, complicated answer that I'll try to simplify it. The reason that baseball didn't try to regulate shifts before now was that they assumed that hitters would do what you just described. They would adjust. If there was a wide open left side of the field, they would take advantage of that. We haven't seen that much. And there are a lot of reasons for it, but everything fits together. Let's put it that way. It is so hard now to score by thinking you're going to get 3 singles off Max Scherzer or Jacob deGrom. It's just not going to happen. And so for that reason, hitters are not coached to do what Tony Gwynn used to do. They're coached to hit the ball over the shift, whether they're left-handed or right-handed, because just slapping a single through that hole and then hoping the next guy does it too, and the next guy does it too, it's very unlikely that that's how you're going to score. And so if you're going to just swing normally and think line drive, ground ball, we just talked about it because of the shift. Ground balls are outs. A lot of those line drives are now outs with the shift because we're the defense. We know where you're going to hit the ball and somebody's going to be standing there. And so what hitters are coached to do is try to uppercut and swing over shifts to try to hit the long ball, hit the ball in the air. The guys who hit the ball hard in the air are the best hitters in baseball. That's what everybody is coached to do now. And because of that, it's a reason that you see baseball thinking we may have to change the rules because we've waited a long time for the hitters to adjust. It just hasn't happened.
Question coming in from John Shatraw. The MLB contract with the Players Association will expire in December of this year. What do you see as the major hot button issue in the negotiation?
John, they don't agree on much of anything. So almost any issue you could name would fit that definition. But, we've seen a lot of discussion again this spring of service time and how young players, future stars, don't make teams out of spring training because clubs admit that they manipulate those players' service time to get an extra year out of them before they go to free agency. And you're certainly going to see the players union push for some completely different system than what we've had dating back to the days of Marvin Miller 40 years ago. Salary arbitration, free agency in 6 years. The players don't think that's working for them. And I think that might be the hottest button issue, but there certainly are going to be others. What you've seen happen to veteran players in free agency. That's certainly a hot button issue. Teams that are tanking, and so they're not signing free agents, they're not spending money. That's another big issue. I think you're going to see the players want Major League Baseball to think outside the box and redesign the system that's been in place for 40 years. Can that happen without a work stoppage? Bruce, I hope so.
I hope so as well. I think we all do. A lot of people have been checking in on the chat room asking about your next book project, Jayson. They're wondering if you have something that you're working on. Do you have a timetable? What's the latest on that?
All I can say is I have an idea in the back of my mind, but it's been in the back of my mind for about 5 years now. It hasn't moved to the front of my mind. So, like, stay tuned on this. It's a book I want to do, but I don't want to broadcast it yet. It'd be a fun idea that I think people would really love. I've written a lot of columns about this particular thing, but I cannot divulge that information quite yet.
Fair enough. Something in the works. We'll have to wait and see what it is. Final question, Jayson. I want to talk a little bit about this man, Dick Allen, because you grew up in Philadelphia. He passed away in December. It was kind of a shock to my system. I had not heard about him being ill, but apparently he had been for a while. Had the pleasure of meeting him a number of years ago, found him to be very engaging, charming. Dick Allen, who at times was a very controversial figure, but a beloved figure also in Philadelphia. You never covered him, but you were telling me that he was one of the reasons that you became really interested in baseball. He was a guy that you followed.
Yeah, growing up in Philadelphia at the time that Dick Allen arrived in the big leagues in 1964, he was a big reason that I became a baseball fan. He was the first athlete that I can ever remember seeing who gave me that feeling that I think people have now when they watch Steph Curry or Patrick Mahomes. You know, you have this vision in your mind of what human beings are capable of. And then you see the really special athletes do stuff that you never thought was possible, and it changes everything. And that was me with Dick Allen. When I was a kid, my dad, my uncle, they would take me to Old Connie Mack Stadium to watch the Phillies play. And I saw Dick Allen hit baseballs where I never thought human beings could possibly hit a ball. You know, Connie Mack Stadium had kind of a Fenway-like layout, only in reverse. The monster was in right field, and the stands in left were high with billboards atop the roof. People should go take a look at that park. It was beautiful. Dick Allen would hit balls over those billboards. He'd hit balls over the scoreboard in deep right center, over that monster-like, I believe it was 65-foot wall in right, out of the park in dead center field, which was something like 447 feet. It was an incredible thing to see somebody do that. And so just from watching him and watching the Phillies get good around him for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, like that infused me with a love of baseball. So I guess that had a lot to do with the rest of my life, because I fell in love with baseball. It made me want to become a baseball writer. And because I became a baseball writer, I got honored in Cooperstown, New York, where you're sitting right now. And like, it's really incredible to think of the stuff that happens along the way, the people who come along, who change everything about your life. Dick Allen was one of those people for me. And the incredible thing is, I never even met him.
Well said. Great memories of a fantastic player, Dick Allen. As always, we thank Jayson for being with us. He does tremendous work for The Athletic. I've recently just gotten a subscription to that here through the Hall of Fame, and I'm going to be reading Jayson's stuff regularly. Won the 2019 BBWAA Career Excellence Award and has written a number of books. Jayson, as always, great job. We hope you get to be at the ballpark this year. I think you will eventually.
Bruce, hope our paths cross at one of those ballparks. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. We thank you also, or thank the Ford Motor Company for their generous support of these programs. Ford Motor Company was not around for us last year when we started doing these programs, but they are sponsoring all of our programs in 2021. And we do thank Ford Motor Company for their generous support. We hope you've enjoyed the program with the great writer, Jayson Stark. Have a great day, everybody.